Greetings, everyone. You are listening to Horror Nerds at Church, a ridiculously queer podcast where we take a deep dive into a horror film and talk about how it connects to queerness, religion, and theology. Or maybe you're watching us, since this is also going to be on YouTube. I'm very excited. My name is Pace Warfield May, and I am that creepy specter that haunts cishets in the night, I guess.
And the other person, the other one on screen.
Oh, yes. And this is Gandalf, kind of the unofficial mascot of Horror Nerds at Church, who I'm holding here in the vain hope that he'll be quiet through our recording, since we're not recording in Riverside, and it'll be harder for me to edit out if he makes noises.
And I'm Pastor Emily, and I am the pastor that continuously shows up to the hauntings and yet never succeeds at exorcisms.
Oof, that sounds like quite the vocation there.
Yep.
Oh.
That was not supposed to be quite what that was.
Yay!
Yay, vocation.
At church. So this episode is going to basically be an introduction to our YouTube channel, an introduction to our podcast, if you're listening to it that way. But before we get into that, Emily and I just like to check in with how the other person has been doing. So how's your life been?
My life's been not too bad, in the middle of some work life changes, but we just had Trans Pride here in Baltimore, and so that was delightful, and I have rediscovered my love of facial artistry. So I'm just gonna start doing a bunch of pride flags on my eyeballs.
I love it. I love it. Hopefully not like on your eyeballs themselves. That would hurt.
Yeah, less on my eyeballs than on my eyelids.
Perfect. Love it.
How are you doing, Pace?
I am okay. It's June, so like happy Pride Month, as Emily was saying. And so it's also like the hottest time of year, and I don't like summer, so I'm not happy about that part. Like I kind of wish that Marcia and Sylvia would have thrown that brick on like a nice autumn day or something instead of the dead of summer, but we know how that goes. But yeah,
also, like back in the day, it was spring, right? Like it was the end of spring, the beginning of summer. We just have, climate change.
True. New York at the end of June. Yeah. I guess in the 70s. I don't know what. I'm not familiar with New York enough, but I know you have been to New York quite a bit. So
yeah, I mean, New York in June wasn't always as hot as it usually is these days.
Fair. Yeah. Have you been watching anything, reading anything fun or spooky or?
Yes, I am reading Warcross by Marie Lu. It's the first of 2 books. It's a young adult sci-fi dystopia thing. Marie Lu, the author, used to be a video game programmer, designer, or something. So there's a lot of like video gamey stuff in the book, which I really like. And I am listening to the Star Wars from a certain point of view on audiobook, which is fantastic. I had read it in like a physical copy book before, and the audiobook, there's like sound effects and like all sorts of amazingness.
The Star Wars audiobooks are quite awesome productions.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, sound effects, music score, and I love also for the from a certain point of view audiobooks that they got a huge amount of narrators, including some of the voice actors who played people in certain parts of the series and stuff like Clone Wars and stuff like that came back for that. So it's really well done, good production. So
Yeah.
um
Agreed.
yeah, awesome, awesome.
What about you?
I have been following along with our friend podcast Horror Queers. They were on our Shining episode.
Mm-hmm.
They do calendars, like watch along calendars, kind of like we do for
Mm-hmm.
Advent. Must have been me. Like you will see if
Yeah.
you follow our socials, but they do it at certain points throughout the year, and they're doing one for Pride Month about queer
Oh.
horror. So I've been kind of trying to watch along with their suggestions. And so, like for dolls, for instance, one of the days was dolls. So like how many queer dolls show up in horror. I watched M3gan or Megan as it's called for that one and stuff like that. It's been a lot of fun. And then beyond that, I've been reading the Animorph saga, which some of you listeners may be familiar with. It was a middle
Mm.
grade slash young adult kind of border between those two age groups series of books, similar to like Babysitter's Club or something like that. And it's written by K.A. Applegate. It's really cool sci-fi stuff, diverse group of characters. It was from the 90s, so not like quite as hip on queer diversity, but like cultural diversity and stuff like that. It's a little bit better with, but I just love the books. I love revisiting these as an adult. And I also love ever since a certain young adult to middle grade author has become publicly with their turfiness and disgusting ways,
Mm-hmm.
K.A. Applegate has taken it as her kind of personal journey as a middle grade young adult author to combat that. So anytime she's at appearances, you often see her wearing like trans pride flags and stuff like that to kind of help combat that and show that not all middle grade young adult authors are gross. Some are actually good.
I love that. That is
Right.
fantastic.
Right. So
Mhm.
yeah, so check out the Animorphs if you never read them, listeners. They're really fun. But yeah.
Nice.
Well, I guess we can talk about, since this is our introductory episode, who we are as your hosts. And then we'll talk
Mhm.
a little bit about what the podcast is. But I guess I can go first. I am Pace Warfield May. I'm a PhD candidate at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California, where my research interests include Martin Luther and queer theology and kind of early modern history and like the development of sexual and gender identities and stuff like that into a more modern way. So that's what I do. I also have and continue to work in churches a lot. So you can see my lovely background. If you're watching us on YouTube, it says church is horror for those who are only listening. So that's kind of another kind of theme of the podcast. But in addition to my studies, I've been a lifelong fan of horror and a lifelong scholar of like queerness and theology and religion. So all that kind of comes together in this podcast. And right now I live in Minneapolis. Um, I live with two dogs, one who you saw, Gandalf, and the other one, Yoshi, is a little too big for to be on my lap for this recording. But
Doesn't mean Yoshi wouldn't try if you gave
possibly,
Yoshi the
possibly.
opening.
He's a tourist though, so he's kind of stubborn and likes to like right now I think he's probably laying down in my office, like where he can be alone and stuff.
Mm,
A little
solid.
stubborn introvert there with the Yoshi dog. What about you, Emily? Who are you for all of our listeners? They're dying to know.
Ah, I am a Lutheran pastor. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am in Baltimore, Maryland. Uh,
Awesome.
I am a co-host not only of Horror Nerds at Church, but co-host and co-producer of Nerds at Church, our sibling podcast, which takes a look at nerdery and the Bible and kind of breaks it open and explores and does deep dives and that sort of thing. I also am the creator of Roll for Sermon, which is just taking off, and inspired by Roll for Sandwich by Adventures in Ardia on TikTok and YouTube. So, yeah, but we also are both part of the Diaconia.Faith Collective. And so that is a group that is a group of 4 friends who are working to answer what if faith were more accessible to people and what
5
if
friends,
theology
right?
was. What?
5 friends? No,
4
4.
friends.
Oh, see, I'm glad I can do math. I'm not the math nerd of the podcast.
That's me. That's me.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of, I am not a horror buff. So as you can tell by our name badge thingies,
Yeah.
I am a horror Padawan. And this is maybe a good way to get into talking about the podcast, but I joined the podcast in season 3 when we did a vampire season on the Twilight movies, which,
Yes.
if they're not horrific, I don't know what is.
Agreed.
Um,
Agreed.
yeah, but so I joined for that and then ended up sticking around for our 4th season on Nightmare on Elm Street, and then we are just wrapping up our Ghost and Ghostbuster season before
Mhm.
heading into a brief break and then Star Wars and the Alien franchise.
Yep.
So I am slowly getting into horror, but not. I still watch it usually during the daytime with the lights on. Um, and we keep track of jump scares.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, for
Or-
both of us, but mostly because of me. Uh, yeah, so it's been interesting to like get to know some of the tropes in horror, which actually makes it more interesting and fun for me.
yeah.
But also for those of you who may or may not be interested in horror, we always have some, at least a few movies and stuff that are non-horror movies,
Yeah.
or horror themed, but not quite.
Yeah. Like
Like,
mistakes or family friendly horror.
yeah, like Casper.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I'm glad you shared your pronouns, and I always forget to share mine because I hate the concept of pronouns, like referring to me in general, so I never think to share them. But I use they, them, or none, no pronouns. But we're both queer as fuck, we're both trans, we're both awesome. And our podcast is awesome and queer as fuck and trans. So
And
uh
non-binary, hence the
non-binary. Yes.
eyeshadow.
Yes, yes. So all of that. Um, yeah, a little bit about horror nerds at church. As Emily alluded to, there is space for all sorts of horror fans here at Horror Nerds at Church, which include if you are a fan of some of the super scary, horrific, horrifying movies out there. We try to cover many of those. We've already been through quite a few of the slashers franchises. We went through Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. And then but we also do stuff for that is we call horror adjacent. So some stuff like our upcoming Star Wars season, or we did an episode on Blade, which is kind of more of like a vampire action movie than
Mhm.
outright horror. We still consider it horror here at Horror Nerds at Church. We have an expansive definition of horror, but I know not everybody would agree with that. That's fine. But we try to include some stuff like that. We include low stakes, family friendly horror like the Hocus Pocus movies, like Hotel Transylvania. We've done stuff like that. The Addams Family,
Vampirina.
Vampirina on our YouTube. Exactly, exactly. Twilight. I guess Twilight is high stakes horror, but a different kind of stakes than
Different
we
kind of,
usually
yeah.
see in horror.
Yep.
Most other horror. Uh, and then and just kind of a whole diversity of everything in between that. So like the season, we just recently recorded Candyman. We're going to record Nope in a few episodes in a few weeks. But we are also covering the Ghostbusters franchise and
Yeah.
Casper the Friendly Ghost. So all sorts of stuff there. Uh but basically how our podcast works, we take a movie and we talk about the movie. We talk about the ways that is horror. We talk about the ways it connects to queerness, the ways it connects to theology. Emily, as our resident pastor, knows their Bible really well, so we'll pull in like the ways in which the movie is misusing Bible quotes, for instance, which happens a
All
lot.
the time. Also,
All the time.
revelation, not
Yes.
girl. No
Yes.
S. Revelation. That's a pet peeve of both of us, actually. But
Exactly. Yep. And stuff like that. And we also like we'll do a little bit of religious fact checking on movies that comment on it. For instance, our Casper had an exorcism in it, believe it or not, this family-friendly movie. So we talked a little bit about what that would actually look like. And so many graveside funerals in horror
oh
movies,
my gosh,
and
they're
they all
awful.
get them wrong on so many pieces. So
So bad.
uh, but yes, that's Horror Nerds at Church. We have a season format. Each season is somewhere in the realm of 10 to 25 episodes long, depending if it's a shorter mini season or a full length season. And for the seasons, we take a horror franchise. Like I said, we've done Twilight, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Ghostbusters, and next season we're doing Alien and Star Wars. So we take a franchise and we cover the entire franchise, and then we also throw in a bunch of other movies, kind of either on a theme or sometimes it's just like potpourri of variety of horror. So
Yeah. And sometimes the like randomness becomes a theme
yeah,
accidentally. Like last year with nightmares and dreams.
yeah, yeah.
Last season. Yeah. Indeed, indeed. We also then have mini-sodes that we do, and these are significantly more sporadic.
Yes.
Um, but our mini-sodes can be just kind of folks will send in, and you are certainly invited to send in your own real life church horror stories, and we'll give a couple at the end to give you kind of an example. But whether it's supernatural or just church people being awful. And then we'll share those and talk about them. You can send them in anonymously or with your name. But we'll share them and then we'll talk about them and kind of help, especially for the ones that are like church people being shitty. Um, it tends to be helpful to know that like, oh no, that was bad. And
Mhm.
here's other things you can do. And here's like some of the ways that we try
Yeah.
to combat that. But we also have a series, a mini-sode series that is sporadically happening on polyamory. So if you are curious or don't know about polyamory, we've got like the polyamory 101 kind of episode. We've got what the Bible says about polyamory. We've got our special guest Brian from Queer Theology was on to talk about his experience of polyamory. And then we have one more episode, a mini-sode for polyamory coming up.
Yeah, whenever we get around to scheduling it with the panel of guests we hope to have for that one. And then minisodes can also be on a theme, like we did one on The Black Guy Dies First, which was a
Mhm.
book that came out this year on tropes, especially racist and racial tropes that appear in cinema. And it was great to talk with the authors of that book. So
Mhm.
all sorts of types of episodes here on Horror Nerds at Church.
Yeah,
Uh,
indeed.
and if you love us or you hate us and you want to support us either way, maybe you want to hate support us, that's fine. I'm not going to
We'll
judge.
take it.
Yes. So we have a Patreon which has extra episodes for you to listen to. There's over 100 hours of extra bonus content on there. We have Boo Tubes, which are basically our show, except instead of covering a movie, we're talking about a TV show. We've done everything from Vampirina to Stephen King's Rose Red to Foundation, Doctor Who,
Doctor Who.
Steven
Lots of Doctor
Universe.
Who.
Golden Girls was our very first BooTube before Emily was co-host, so that was a really fun one too.
Mhm.
So we have fun on our BooTubes. We've
Yeah.
done Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That was another fun
Yep.
one.
And we'll
So
usually pick like 3 or so episodes to
Yeah.
talk about. So then you can watch those specific episodes as a refresher if you want, or you can just enjoy.
Yep. Yep. So those are available on Patreon .com/horror nerds at church. It's only $5 to sign up. You get access to all that. You also get access to movie commentary tracks where we basically, Emily and I will watch a movie, sometimes with alcohol and or edibles involved, and just provide our commentary as we're watching the movie, record that, and then you can watch the movie along with us in sense and play our track and hear what our thoughts are. So
And hear me do jump scares because
yes.
so far the most common place for me to have any jump scares is when we're doing the movie commentaries. So,
Candyman, for instance, was the one that is coming
yeah.
out for this month, June. The original 1994, 1992, somewhere around there, Candyman. And that one has the most audible Emily jumps on it. Like they are like the whole
Yeah,
thing.
no, that one has both the most jump scares and super audible jump scares. To
Yeah.
the extent that like sometimes when I watch horror movies with people, they have jump scares because of my jump scare. Like they might not actually be scared from
Yeah.
what's happening in the movie, but because I like react so strongly, then they get startled.
Yep, yep. So all that's available right now for you on Patreon. You can jump scare along with us
Yes.
or along with Emily.
And available on our Patreon, but I believe to everyone, are some really
Yeah.
awesome Zoom backgrounds because we know that Zoom is not going anywhere. We will
Yep.
continue to be using Zoom and video conferencing for the foreseeable future. So if you want
Yeah.
something like this, or we've got a whole bunch of different images that you can choose from, you can find them also on our Patreon.
Yep. And those are free to everybody, whether you're a Patreon supporter or not. Just go to patreon.com/horror at church. Scroll back a little bit, you'll find them. But we have our $5 tier, which has everything we just named. But we also have a $10 tier. Our $5 tier is horror nerds. Our $10 tier, horror buffs. And for $10, your name will be read on the podcast at least once a quarter as a way of saying thank you. You'll get additional bonus content and episodes that the other tier does not get. And this is going to be huge in our Star Wars season since there's just so much Star Wars movies and TV shows. We couldn't all
And
fit it
books.
into a main feed and a Patreon feed. So it's a good thing we have two Patreon feeds to try to fit it all. So huge there. And then the other thing you get for that is apparently my superpower, I've been told, is being able to play matchmaker between a person and a movie.
It's true. It's not even like apparently. It is true. That is how I have been able to get into horror, is
Yeah.
because Pace has been so wonderfully on point about what to suggest.
So yeah, apparently if you want some custom tailor-made to you pace recommendations on movies, this is the way to go as well. Patreon.com/horror at church for a $10 tier. I'll give you those movie recommendations once a month. I'll give you a recommendation of something I think you would like. You'll fill out a short little questionnaire, and then I will use that to help play matchmaker between you and a movie. And I want to be clear, like it's not just scary movies. If you're a horror Padawan, I can help you introduce you. You just want to test out the waters of horror of some low stakes, not scary stuff. Happy to do that. If you want the goods, want the absolute terrifying stuff, happy to do that. If you want something not horror at all, true crime, I don't know, stuff like that, Disney, I can help with that. Also, though, I can pull on Emily to help with some of the stuff that
It's
isn't
true.
quite as
It's
horror.
true. If you want the like really good recommendations, Pace has them. But you qualify for Pace or I to recommend movies. So if you want my recommendation, it will likely not be super horror.
Yeah.
But
If it's
you know, Disney comics, like
if
superhero,
it's an
Disney superhero.
yeah, yeah. If
I,
it's a
I got some
recommend
recs. They're just not My superpower, the way that their pace is superpower.
I was just gonna say, if you want a recommendation from Emily, it'll probably be A, something you've already seen, and B, something that they just found out about and thought that nobody else knew about because they just found out about, even though it's been around for 20 years.
Oh, I always know that everybody else already knows about it, but I just have
So
never seen Casablanca, for example.
that's okay. You're not missing much. Um,
That's actually not
a
what I
little,
hear, but I'm glad to hear
little
it from
bit
you.
racist of a movie, but
There we go. So
as
glad I'm missing out.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, so all of that Horror Nerds at Church, patreon.com/Horror Nerds at Church for all that fun stuff. You also can sign up for a newsletter. You automatically get signed up if you're a Patreon supporter because we assume you love us and want to know about us. But if you don't want to support us on Patreon, or can't for whatever reason, even if you want to, that's fine. You can still sign up for a newsletter. I'll make sure that's linked in the show notes since I don't remember the link for that off the top of my head.
Yes.
But we also have merch, tons of merch, especially this is Pride Month. So much Pride merch specifically. Uh, if
And
you go, I was just
and
say, if
it's
you go to bit.ly/capital N Nerds at Church merch, all the letters are all the first letters are capital N, capital A, capital C, capital M. But go there, bit.ly/Nerds at Church merch. Tons of merch there.
it's true. And it is a joint merch store for both Nerds at Church and Horror Nerds at Church. And so you get not only the fabulous horror related merch and the delightfulness, but also you get the Nerds at Church, liturgically colored masks that proclaim Pax
If
Vobiscum.
you are a church nerd, you will love this store. If you're a horror nerd, you will love this store.
If you're queer, you will love this
If you're
store.
queer, you will love this store.
Like there's queer nerds at church, there's all sorts of different things, and murder bad.
Yeah.
You know, the important things that we are teaching people, being to and be to transition, all that stuff.
Like
So
this shirt, for example, which you
yeah,
may have been able to see, was made by Eugene Johnson, friend of the podcast. And so he made exclusive monster designs for season 2 for us on Horror Nerds at Church. So those are available on our merch store. So much cool
yeah.
stuff.
And those, a lot of the aside from those monster specific ones, a lot of the graphics are Pace's brilliance. This is from Pace. Like, there is no understating how brilliant Pace's designs are. So, if nothing else, just go to look at it.
Right. I mean, our newest design for Pride this month, just to tell you about it, is a recreation, a reimagining of the creation of man by Michelangelo, of the hand of God. It's just a close-up of the hand of God, and then Freddy Krueger's knife glove as if they're about to touch, like a recreation of that with some rainbow splash on the background. That's our Pride merch this month. Love it. That was an idea that came to me in a fever dream, I'm pretty sure, but it was so fun to make.
I mean, it's so great. It might just be a new logo.
Oh, yeah. You might even see that below in a new logo.
I was going to say, I think it's visible.
Yep.
Amazing. Yeah.
So,
also,
yeah, please go.
Also, another way to help support us if you can't support us with regular financial contributions is through our Amazon list. So we have an Amazon list that is some of the stuff that we just need for the podcast and to keep the podcast going. This is a labor of love and a labor. And so we need tools for the labor. So you can access that at amzn.to/30 no. Oh no.
30LX.
No, it's 30.
Oh yes, 30. Good job.
30, capital L, capital X, A, capital E, A.
Yes.
We'll put it in the description.
Yes, all the stuff will be in the description in the show notes. So if you're not catching it, that's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But also, if you don't have money right now because we're in the late stage capitalist global pandemic. A great way to still support us is to let other folks know about us, to share our episodes with folks, to rate us and leave reviews on
Mhm.
Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts, as well as Facebook, because you can leave reviews and rate us on our Facebook page.
Yeah, and we love that so much, especially when you go around and spread the good news of horror nerds at church.
Yes,
Um,
become an evangelist for horror nerds at church.
right,
It's
right.
great.
I mean, it's, what better message to evangelize than that church is horror for the queer community?
Seriously, seriously, says the theologian and the pastor.
Yep. But yeah, so but thank you again, all of you who support us in all the ways you can do. Definitely like and subscribe to us on YouTube if you're watching us on YouTube.
Mhm.
That will also help so instrumentally in helping spread the word about horror nerds at church.
Indeed, indeed. And now the time has come for the real life horror. I can talk. Real life church horror stories, where we will give you some examples of what it might be to share or explore real life church horror stories. If you would like to send in one of yours, you can send it in to horrornerdsatchurch@gmail.com and that will get to us.
Yep.
I was trying to think of one and was having trouble thinking of one that I could actually share without getting in trouble. But one of the things, so when I was growing up, our congregation worshipped in interfaith chapels, a couple interfaith chapels that had like basically several different congregations shared the worship space, and they like rented office space, and that came with like a time slot, right? So the Jewish congregation had Friday nights, the Catholic congregation had Saturday afternoons, the Lutherans, which was my denomination, had Monday mornings at 9:30, all the way through to the Baptists on Sunday nights. But part of what that meant is that the buildings were bigger. The actual chapels were bigger and were full of all sorts of stuff, because you have everything from like Catholic and Episcopal bells and whistles to Baptist to like contemporary music to the Star of David to crosses, all of that stuff, because everything had to go up and come down each week. And so we would play sardines in the Beaver Creek Chapel. And I vividly remember this one game. And so there were games where like I did really well at hiding, because if you hide behind all the stuff and nobody's allowed to turn the lights on, then you can go for a very long time. Unfortunately, not everybody obeys the rules about lights turning on. There was one time where we were hiding. I found somebody and they were hiding in like this closet, but like on top of like the laundry machine or something. And our youth director ended up also finding us. And so we're all like hanging out there. And there was like one person left seeking everybody. And she slid the door open. And instead of like screaming at her, he just hissed at her. He was like, hiss.
Ooh.
And she was terrified. It was hilarious. Like, scared her more than a boo or a like, would have. It was great. So I don't know if there were actual ghosts in either of those buildings, because they were pretty new, from like the 1950s, 60s, 70s. But yeah. What about you, Pace?
I'm trying to choose between so many because church
Right?
can be horror. But
I was gonna say you did grow up as a PK or pastor's kid.
yes, I grew up
So
as a pastor's kid, so that was a whole bunch of horror there. But I will say, I think I'm going to tell a supernatural one, but what do you want to hear? the bones in the graveyard or the possession, possible possession?
Yes.
Both. Well, I'll save one for
You know me, I can't choose.
okay, I'll tell them both, but I'll save one for our Patreon. So uh
Ooh, yeah.
y'all watching this on YouTube, if you want to hear, I'll tell on this one the bones in the graveyard story.
Okay.
Yes. And then I'll tell on Patreon the possible possession story. So here we go. Bones in the graveyard. My mom was a pastor at this 3-point parish, rural Maryland, farmland at this time in Frederick County, at a time when Frederick County was mostly farms and not a suburb for DC. For those of you who are familiar with that area of Maryland on the East Coast. And all three of the churches had graveyards that were on site, as many small farming community churches did. One of the churches, Saint Matthew, sat on top of this bank that overlooked a hill, and as the graveyard was on the hill, and then there was a river that ran alongside the other boundary of the graveyard. So as happens sometimes in this area, heavy snowfalls lead to the river swelling. So there's some flooding that happens. So there's a little bit of a high river in spring. Must have relocated some animals and stuff. But anyway, one of the kids is playing in the graveyard of the church and finds something, shows it to all the us other kids who are there, and I'm sitting there like, oh look, somebody left a chicken bone or something outside in the graveyard that they were eating, is what I thought, and
Oh
I was probably about like 8 or 9 when this happened. But the kid is like, no, this is cool. I found this bone out in the graveyard. So takes it to an adult, and the adult is like, oh yeah, wait, what the hell? And it was a bone.
no. Ooh.
I think it was like probably a finger bone, which is how it was like small enough that I thought it was a chicken bone, but I don't remember fully. So they asked us to go to where this kid found this, and we all like tramp off, all of us kids eager to see. And there was like a few little bones, like a ring and some scraps of fabric just laying out in the middle of the graveyard. So the adult starts freaking out that like someone's trying to get into the grave, stuff like that. Us kids are thinking this is really cool, of course, or like there's some haunting going on. We're not sure. But anyway, long story short, the pastor, my mom, and like the church council and stuff must have investigated. It was a groundhog that frequently groundhogs do this in graveyards, will crawl in, burrow into like a casket or something like that, and sometimes pull things out to help make room or whatever the case is. This is one of the reasons why most states, I believe, now have your casket is usually surrounded in metal or some sort of stone to prevent this from happening. But anyway, that's what was going on in our small country church. So the spring swelling water probably caused the groundhog to locate further upstream and dig a hole into our grave, into a grave in our cemetery.
See, for me, that would be like a reason to have a green burial that accelerates the decomposition process,
Yes,
not to pump even more preservatives and all of that stuff into the ground. But
fair. I'm all about I'm horror nerds of church. Why not just share these fun facts about Pace and Emily? But I'm all about cremation personally. It's like just cremate me.
I like green burials. My mom's a cremation, but there's just like it still takes so much energy to burn a body that I'm
Yeah,
like, you know
true.
what? Pine wood box or a shroud or a linen shroud, wrap me up. If you can bury me somewhere that it's gonna be politically inconvenient for someone, right? Like bury
Like
me in Cop
the
City,
old age
and then it'll
style.
stop Cop
Right.
City
Yeah.
because it's a burial ground.
I like it. I like it. Great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's Horror Nerds at Church. Come to Patreon, and I'll put up a quick video of me sharing the other story about the possible pace possession. So,
Also, special thanks to super techie genius and friend of the podcast, Susanna Porter, who is delightful and makes all of the complex techie things fit
yeah,
together
so many
wonderfully.
thanks to you, Susanna, and also thanks to Ian Hazeltine, who is helping put some of the stuff on YouTube. So our YouTube is finally becoming populated with content after about a year of existing.
Ta-da!
Yay! So thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Ian. Y'all are the best.
Indeed. And that's it for our intro show. Our
Yay.
theme music was by Matt May. Our video techie geniusing was, as we mentioned, by Susanna Porter. Horror Nerds at Church releases every Thursday. Please comment, rate, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Including YouTube now.
Including YouTube. Ta-da! Support us on Patreon and get access to exclusive movie commentary episodes, BooTube episodes, and more bonus content that we just told you about by going to patreon.com/horrornerdsatchurch. It starts at only $5 to sign up, which is definitely cheaper than the cost of getting buried in any capacity.
Yes.
Follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram at Horror Nerds at Church, and Twitter at HNACPOD for all the latest updates and about upcoming films, news, and other announcements. Until next time, keep it spooky, keep it safe.
Aww.